Okay. So I was thinking about doing live coding, but I don't think I'm going to handle this. That was really, thank you so much. Okay, so hi, I'm already so excited just to be here in NGBE. This is such I've heard so many great things about this conference, about this wonderful community. So I'm very, very honored to be here. And now I'm even more honored. Thank you. I love you guys. Really, I love you guys. Thanks. Okay, so let's talk about reactive forms. So you know all of this about me already. Another thing that I wanted to show you. Here, you've probably seen my family here somewhere. I don't know if they're in the audience now. So that's something that recently happened. My baby is 9 months old now. So yes, I'm an NG mom, traveling with my NG baby and his React dad. Yeah. Okay. So everything's fine. Let's start with the demo. Okay. So I prepared a little demo for testing reactive forms and taking them to the extreme. And what we have here is a system where you can choose seats in a theater like this. There are different seat types, like seats for children, seats that are super comfy, or whatever you want. There's a different configuration form for that. And then you can, okay, and you also see that it gets live updates from the server, where the seats that have been occupied by someone else already, they've been disabled. So you can't click on them, but you can select other seats that you want. You also have the count of the seats that you selected. And there's also a validation about what you've selected. So if you select a wrong one that has just been occupied, but you know the data from the server didn't come on time, so it validates it against the server and tells you, oh, oops, this is already occupied, and it unselects it and disables it. So let's see this again. And there's like this error message telling you what seat it is, so you can pay attention, like know that you have to select a different one. Okay, so this is not a real system. There are many ways to implement this, but I've chosen this because it has a lot of opportunities to do with reactive forms in Angular. So just a little bit more about the architecture here and what it's doing. So in the client, we have in the router the room ID, and we send it to the server to get the room configuration, how many rows, how many seats, what types of rows. With this configuration, we create the form, and we get the live data, either by WebSocket or polling, or however you like. And whenever you select, then it asks the server, is it occupied? The server can do also other stuff there, like reserve this seat for you for like 20 minutes, so no one else occupies it in this time. And of course, save. And there's a service, there's a DB service that I implemented that has these methods that you might see in the slides. So we get the room by ID, seats update observable, okay, because we get all the time the data, and is seat occupied, that's for the validation. Okay, so why did I choose to do this as a form? So there are many reasons. Forms are all about user inputs, and there is a user input, user interaction here. You can use validation. And so I showed you one type of validation, but also another type that you can implement here that I'm not going to talk about is the synchronous validation. For example, making sure that you didn't leave a gap in your selection in a row. In a form, you can disable controls. So actually, I implemented each seat as a custom control, and you can disable them if you don't want the user to interact with it. You can get data from the server for initializing the form, and also you can patch or set values whenever there's new data. And of course, you can submit the value in the end. So I'm trying to take it to the extreme using observables and reactive programming. And I know that for some people, both reactive forms and reactive programming are like things that you have to get used to. But once you do, it's pretty cool. You can see that the code becomes much cleaner, and the process of doing this is really much more enjoyable. Of course, there are like lots of operators, but even if you know like 10 of those, then you can start going. And it's simple to learn. So what is reactive programming? I'm not going to get into this too much, but there's a good article that I found that says reactive programming is programming with asynchronous data streams. So you get data streams, you look at everything that you want as a data stream, variables or like anything. And you take it to the extreme. You use operators and then subscribe to it to do something with the value that you get. So read this article. It has a good explanation, because in different resources, they don't exactly say what it is. They just tell you how to do this. So what are the advantages of streams of reactive programming? In my opinion, I find these advantages. Say you have one source of data, one stream. You can have multiple listeners to them, and they each one of them is independent. So you don't need to know about a different listener. You can subscribe to the data, you can subscribe to the stream, and do whatever you want with it, and not be afraid that that you're going to mess up with it. You've got operators, so you have this stream of data, and just by applying operators, you get different type of events from it. And again, you can keep the source as is and have another observable taking the source and applying operators to it. So now you have two different sources, and you can subscribe to whichever you need. You can combine different streams, different sources, and the values of them in different methods. And we'll see this also in the slides. And you can also close the stream, so you can prevent memory leaks by completing a stream or unsubscribing. So only if you subscribe to a stream, then it actually does something. So you can unsubscribe to it, and also if you have an error, then it also can close. Okay. So lots of advantages. So let's start using them. And my questions here are like, so we say reactive forms. How reactive really are the reactive forms? What's so reactive about them? Where can we use observables in our reactive forms? Are there any observables? How can we utilize observables in RxJS from outside the forms module with the forms module? So we'll see a few ways, a few places where I've used observables and RxJS with the form. So first is for initializing the form, getting the data, and creating the form. The form itself is actually also a stream that the component that uses it listens to. I create the form, in this case, in a service that's provided in the component. Disabling the control is also depending on data, which is a stream from the server. Async validations, so I'm returning an observable whether there's an error or not. Reacting on the error. So there's an error, and now we need to disable the control and also show an error message and also unselect this control. So all of this I'm doing with streams, and we can also count how many seats we've selected. So let's start. We're initializing the form. How do we do this? So like I said, we're looking at the route params, and the router gives us the service activated route. Is there like a way? Yeah, okay. And this service has the param map, which is an observable. So observable, we pipe operators, and we get the ID from it, okay? So I hold this room ID observable just to get the different IDs, okay? I can use this now in the component. The room itself is also an observable. So I have the room ID, and I switch map it to use a different observable. So get room in the database service returns an observable, but you need to pass the ID first, okay? So switch map is used for that. Then, okay, so we have the room configuration here in the stream. So now I have the stream of the form itself. So again, I'm piping the room information and mapping it to a method where I create the form, okay? And we'll see this method. Now, we're also using the same data that we have about the room for a different stream about that gives us the room name. So we just fetch the room name from the value here. Okay, so we are using one stream to get two different types of data, and we're creating actually two different streams. And now in the component, we can subscribe or use the async pipe for any stream that we want. Okay, and not having to deal with the one stream only. Okay, so how do we fetch the initial value, and what do we do with that? So this may be not exactly how it's like in the code. It's a real simplification, but we get the data about the room that has the rows, which is the array, and each row is an array of seats. And the information that we get from the server is the seat type, which is actually an ID, and the seat types come with a different call. Okay, so this is the component, the seat component, which is which implements a control value accessor, meaning we can now use it as a form control. Okay, and to use to make it a form control, it needs to implement write value, and we're also implementing set disabled state because we actually care about disabling this, and we use well, it's a lot more than that. It's only a snippet of this code, but these are the important things that you need to implement when using it as a control. Okay, so write value is whenever the user changes the value, or programmatically you want to change the value with set value. So you need to take whatever you get and do something with it. And when it's disabled, then I'm passing it here to the class and also to the disabled property here. Okay, now I chose to save everything in the value of the seat. So the value of the seat is not only is it occupied or not, is it selected or not, because there's more. There's the seat number, there's the seat type. So I chose to pass everything, all the data, as the value of the control, even though it's not things that actually the user can change, because it's more convenient for me to have everything in one place instead of having only is the seat selected and then having to fetch all the other properties from a different place, from a state or a service and so on. By the way, I'm not showing how to do this with ngRx, which may be a good solution for that. So the control, the value is actually composed of all of that. Well, not occupied because we don't really need it. If the seat is occupied, we just disable it. Okay. So how do we build the form? I'm sure you've all already worked with forms in Angular, right? So I'm not using the form builder here, but you can definitely use it. It's just using the raw classes. I'm creating a form array. Well, first of all, I'm creating a form group for the whole form, and it contains a form array for the rows. And then I take the data that I got, and I map it to another form array, which has the seat controls inside. Okay? And for the seat controls, I'm just taking the data that I got, the seat type, and I already have the row ID and seat ID from mapping. And I create this object, which is the value. Okay? And like you see, I also hold a reference to it so I can do other stuff on it. Okay? So like I said, I don't need the occupied value here because I'm just using disabling the control. Okay, so let's see how we disable this control. If we get the data about the control being occupied with the data, with the initial data, then this is an option that we can use. Instead of setting the control only with the value, we can also say whether it's disabled or not. But then we have to wrap this. So it's the same form control, and we're wrapping it in with an object with the value. So this is the value just like as before, and disabled, which is a Boolean. Okay, so you can do that. But we get real-time updates, so we need a different method here. So I'm subscribing to the seat updates observable that I have in my DB service. And I'm getting here an object with the members occupied and released. And both of them are arrays of row ID and seat ID. Okay, I want also to know which seats were released in the meantime so that my user can now select them. So for each, so we're first looking at the occupied ones, and for each of them, we're looking for the control in the form, okay? So it starts with rows, then we get the row ID and the seat ID, and then we have the control, this specific seat control in our hands. And now we can disable it, okay? Now, I'm emitting an event here. You don't always need, sorry, I'm not emitting the event. Usually it will emit an event that the value has changed, and then it will do the whole validation and everything. But in this case, I will show you later why. I don't want to emit an event. This is something internal, and I just want to disable it, and that's it. Okay? So the same thing, I'm going over the released ones and doing the same thing. Okay? All right. And now, what about maybe using a set value or patch value when you want to disable a control? Can we use this type of object like we used when we created the form control? What do you say? No, that's right. Why not? Well, because you can. When you're setting a value, you have to pass only the value, okay? Only the seat info, okay? And the same with patch value. In a single form control, set value and patch value are exactly the same. They're implemented differently for a form group and form array, but for a form control, it's just exactly the same. And you can't pass here the disabled true, okay? So you can't do it this way. So what else we can do? Sorry. Oh, oops. Just a moment here. Okay. So if you do have a value on the control that says that the seat is occupied or not, then you can listen to the changes of this form control with value changes. You can subscribe to it and say, okay, when the value changes, check if the value is occupied, and then disable or enable it. So this is a different way of doing this, but I'm sticking with the first way that I showed you. Validation. So clicking, and then it validates, and you get an error message. And so I mentioned the synchronous validation, so I don't have code example for this. I'm not going to go deep into this, but I just want to let you know that you can also do validation not only on a form control. You can write your own custom validation on an array, for example, or on a group, and pass it to the array or group when you create it. So you can listen to the changes. Well, the form module actually listens to the changes and passes the whole array to your validation function, and then you can check the array if you have gaps inside. A different option would be to still do this validation on the selected seat whenever you select it, and on the control you have a reference to the parent, so you can check also the neighboring seats. Okay. But if we're talking about the async validation, whether the seat is occupied and we want to disable it and unselect it if it is occupied, and show an error message, so what can we do? Well, for writing validations in forms in Angular, you actually just write a function that gets a control. But a lot of times you will see that you write a factory function. Okay? So this is an example of a factory function for using as a validator. Why do we need a factory function? Because when setting the validator, we need additional data. So in this case, we need the room ID, the row ID, and the seat ID. And this factory function returns the actual validator, which receives only the control itself. And this is how we would set it. Not the only way, of course, for setting this validator, but when we create this form control, we can pass is seat occupied, this function, with the data that we have here when we create this form control. Okay, but there's a bit of a problem here. We have lots of seat controls here. And for each seat control, we're now creating this function. Okay? So that's a bit of a problem. And we don't really need to do this. We can just have one validator function. So this method is good if, for example, you have the validators minimum length, minimum, maximum. So you're passing an actual value. So, okay, minimum length is 10. So it needs to know that it's 10, and it's not going to change a lot, okay, for each control. So you have a factory function that gives you a validator for 10. But if you have a simple validator like required, it doesn't need a factory function. So that's why when you call required, you don't pass any arguments to it. So let's make it a regular function. And how do we get the data that we need? Well, first of all, we need to know whether the seat is selected or not. If it's not selected, we don't even need to do the async validation, okay? Because we don't need to know whether it's occupied or not. The data will come at some point from the server, okay? So this is really important, not to act on every value change, okay? So return null. Now, it's an async validator. It needs to return, in our case, an observable. So we return of null. And then we have this method on the DB service is seat occupied, and we have to pass to it the room ID, row ID, and seat ID. So row ID and seat ID we have on the control that we're getting for this validator. Okay, we have it in the value because I chose to save everything there. And this room ID, well. We'll see in a moment, but we can have the room ID saved like this in the service that we're creating this form or in the component, but we have also a different method that we're gonna show in a moment. And then we're getting the result. So we're getting an observable of yes, occupied or not, and we're mapping it to either null if everything's okay, or an error object, seat occupied, true, or maybe not true, but with the data about the seat that is occupied. If you want, you can add here whatever you want. So this is the async validator. So let's go back to this room ID. We have, actually, if you remember, the observable of the room ID that we got from the router. So let's use this one, okay? So instead of, no, you will need to handle the providers and everything. And if you're writing the async validator in a different file or in a different class, you'll need to fetch this observable. But then you can do this. You pipe to it and switch map to this method that we have on the database service, okay? And then we just use the room ID. All right, next. Not a lot of time and a little more things that we want to show. We want to react whenever there's an error, okay? So we want to disable, to unselect, and to show the error message. Now, the thing is, to show the error message, the form itself doesn't hold all the errors of the form. So the error exists only on the form control where the error has happened. So this, so we can't access form errors for this. So what will we do? We can, and only if we know the specific control, we can get its errors. So where should the logic be? There are several options. Either in the validator itself, but I don't like to do additional stuff in the validator, like I forgot the word again, side effects. And we can have the logic in a different service or component, or in the seat form control itself, like add to it the logic, and that's what we did here. Okay, so I created a new behavior subject for the errors, and I want to emit an error whenever there is an error. So this subject is global on the service. This is an observable. And now, when I create the seat control, I listen to its changes, to the status changes, and I map them to get the errors. Okay? And also, I want to distinct them. And I can subscribe. Again, there's different methods to do this. I can also do this without subscribing. But here I subscribe, and I emit the errors to this subject whenever there are. So now I'm controlling the errors themselves. so I'm also looking if there's an error of seat taken, and if there is, then I set the value to the same value but select it false. That's how I unselect it, and I also disable it. Okay. Now I want to show the error, but only for 5 seconds. So I'm using a set timeout. But the thing is, when we change it to selected false, then it will become valid again. So it will emit here valid, and then I will not get the error message. It will be error and immediately OK. So I'm filtering only for the invalid state, and then I emit the null only after 5 seconds. OK. My time is kind of up. I hope you can I take another minute? OK, great. So counting the seats. So again, a new behavior subject. Now, I did it here with 2 subjects, but there's also a method of combining them to have only 1. And I'm subscribing to the value changes again on the seat control, and I'm checking whether it's selected or not, and passing 1 or -1, and then I'm using the scan operator to accumulate all of it and have only the total number of seats that we selected. And for this, remember I was talking about emit event false. If we do emit event, if it emits an event, then it messes up our count. So this is important to use here and also here when we're enabling the seats. Okay, so whenever a seat is disabled or enabled from the server, then we don't want to know about it. We don't want to count it here. Okay, but when we do change a selected seat that the user has selected, then we do want this change to count it as a -1. Okay, a few notes. You might find the method register and change. It's not documented very well at the moment, but register and change, you can't use it for fetching changes of that the user did, only ones that you have done with set value programmatically. And also register on disable change. This will emit not only on change, but whenever there is some event of disabling or enabling. So you can disable a control 10 times, it will emit 10 events. So just a few notes that I wanted to show you. Also, testing with observables is super easy. There are great methods for that. And with that, I want, oops. Wrong conference here, but I want to thank you here. I want to thank you, and if you have any questions, I'll be around, and I will also publish the code in a few days, and I'll tweet about it, so make sure you follow me, and you're welcome to talk to me about this, or ngGirls, or Angular, or whatever. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.